Well, good morning, actually afternoon, everyone, I guess, just turning to noontime. Thank you for joining us for this First Friday panel with the CU Denver School of Public Affairs. I'm Paul Teske, the Dean of the school, and I'm delighted to have a growing audience online with our event today. As many of you know, these First Friday events, we used to call the First Friday Breakfast when we held them in person. I think actually our last one was about March 6th last year before COVID hit us. And we've continued them, but at lunchtime and obviously in the virtual format. And we're hoping, maybe by fall, we'll be able to be back in person enjoying breakfast and networking as well as these great conversations. And I should note too, for those of you that are regulars, our April event will be actually the second Friday of April because of the holidays, Passover and Easter in April. It'll be April 9th, and it'll focus on the future of downtown Denver. And we're gathering some experts about how real estate and restaurants and all the things that are associated with density that we used to do a year ago that have been hard to do or unsafe to do in the last year, how quickly that'll bounce back or how that'll change, or how many people getting used to working at home will affect office space and activity downtown, especially in a city like Denver that has been booming so much over the past several years. So we're delighted today to be talking about the future of higher education at CU and at CU Denver, and we have two fabulous leaders to talk about that with us. And I'll introduce them in just a second and get started. But I also want to note that about 12:45, we'll go to your questions, which, obviously you can be thinking of. I will emphasize that both of these folks, Michelle and Mark, do a lot of town halls and a lot of outreach about more specific issues like, the furloughs or tuition increases or other issues that are, very hyper local. And while we can certainly talk about those kinds of issues today, we're trying to have a broader look at the present and future of higher ed and kind of strategic questions about where we're headed and some of the difficult and important issues that we face. So if you can think of your questions more at that level, that'll be really great. So our two panelists today, I'll start with Chancellor Marks. Michelle Marks joined CU Denver as Chancellor in July of 2020, actually in the middle, literally, of the pandemic. So I'm sure that's been an unusual experience in many ways. But Dr. Marks held a series of leadership positions at George Mason University in Virginia, Vice Provost, Associate Provost for Graduate Education, Vice President for Innovation and Education. Prior to that, she was a faculty member in the School of Business at George Mason and other places. She earned her PhD also at George Mason and her undergraduate degree at James Madison. And I'll just say, as a dean, it's been very exciting to have Michelle here for the last 8 or 9 months, and a lot of things going on that are very exciting and very impressive, even in these difficult times. And we also are fortunate to have CU President Mark Kennedy with us today. Mark joined CU as the 23rd president of the system in July of 2019. So he had about 9 months before COVID hit to be getting used to this role. And Mark goes back to his undergraduate degree was from St. John's University and MBA from University of Michigan. He had a distinguished career in business, in retail with Macy's, Pillsbury, and other firms of that time. And then he ran for Congress in 2001 and served the state of Minnesota in Congress from 2001 to 2007. After that, became the director of the Graduate School of Political Management at George Washington University, and then became president of University of North Dakota, and then came to us a little less than 2 years ago. So we're excited to have CU President Kennedy here as well as Michelle Marks. So I have a few initial questions to get this started, and we can kind of go back and forth in terms of who gets to answer them first. And obviously, Mark's focus will be a little more at the system level, and Michelle's more about CU Denver. But I know both are very big, thoughtful thinkers about these questions. So I want to start with some positives. We know that even before COVID, there were a lot of challenges in higher ed around funding, around the values of our degree, student debt, maintaining balanced civil discourse, and those kinds of things. And so it's a very turbulent environment, but I know there's also a lot of very good things going on. And so, Michelle, do you want to start with some of your thoughts on the very positive things that are standing out for you in higher ed right now?
Oh, sure. Thank you, Paul. Thanks for having me today. Well, it's absolutely true that even before the pandemic, higher ed was under attack for being too expensive and not relevant and too disconnected from employers and hard to access for many. And there was some good reason for this concern about higher ed. It is more expensive for students to go to college around the country right now. The multi-decade decline in state support for higher ed means that many public institutions have had to increase their costs to compensate for this, which has shifted the burden of paying for college to students and their families from a public good to more of a private good, which is one big reason why student debt and access and affordability have become such a problem. And this has hurt low-income families the most, many of whom have had to drop out or stop out because they can't afford to keep going. And this trend we've seen exacerbated by the pandemic. And because of this and the perception of the challenges to higher ed, many are seeking faster or cheaper alternatives, like going to a coding boot camp to learn Python or getting an IT credential that will lead to a good paying job, averting college. And I worry about this trend because frankly, higher ed is still the best investment that one can make. It is still very true that college grads makes more in lifetime earnings considerably. They have better health and well-being outcomes. They have more life happiness outcomes. Most of the jobs in Colorado, frankly, and all over the country are still requiring a college degree. And also we know that your first job out of college has a huge impact on one's career and life trajectory. So I want to maybe reframe the question a bit to acknowledge that while higher ed does have challenges, primarily in access, affordability, and relevance, that the challenge and the opportunity right now is to reframe how we address these challenges and improve the higher education experience. And at CU Denver, we're doing exactly this. CU Denver has a long history of serving a wide variety of learners. We're good at serving students who are transferring in. We're good at serving students who are working as well as going to school. We are good at serving learners as they switch careers over the course of a lifetime. And we are good at serving learners who are first in their family to go to college. And so I think the opportunity here is focusing on how we make it easier for people to get the education they need and to meet their goals in alignment with employers' needs.
Thank you, Chancellor. President Kennedy, your thoughts on this question?
Well, you know, the pandemic has turned everything upside down, and many people are in fields of work where they may not be needed anymore, just because of how technology is advancing. If you want to talk about the good news about higher ed is now needed more than ever. And as you look, frankly, at the frictions that we have within our society, I really believe that a lot of that is because there's so many people that don't feel as if technology is benefiting them. And education helps people be prepared for the rapid advance of technology that we're facing. So my wife and I are both first-generation college graduates. We know what kind of an uplift that having that college degree gave to us. So that's why we're here at the University of Colorado. We want to give that to more. And so as you heard Chancellor Marks say, we've got a lot of innovation going on within the university at all of our campuses to say, how can we reach more people? How can we give them what they need? How can we make that more affordable? How can we help them on their path to success to the greatest extent possible? We're also finding that it's no longer one and done. You got a degree, you're set for life. It's that you need that lifelong learning. You need to have extra help to keep up along the way. And, you know, when you talk about boot camps for coding or things like that, there's more that we can do to help people with that initial step in life that may be on a way to a degree, but not a degree in itself. So our ability to really solve the biggest challenges that we face in society of how do we make sure everybody can benefit from the technology advances, our ability to give everybody a step up. And when we give them a step up, we're giving not just them a step up, we're giving their families for generations and their communities a step up. We work in very rewarding work that is now needed more than ever. So that's what makes me always keep a positive view about the challenges before us and how we can overcome them.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you both. My next question is more about COVID, which is kind of unavoidable in this past year, but I don't want to spend the whole time on it. But it's obviously required a huge pivot for all of our society, but certainly for higher ed. And higher ed is often criticized as a fairly, large bureaucratic ship that's kind of slow to move. That made me think of at the School of Public Affairs in our leadership classes, we often teach about the difference between technical and adaptive leadership. And the narrative that's often used is the Ernest Shackleton story, right, where he was headed to the South Pole and going to do all these great things, but his boat gets stuck in the ice, and his leadership has to shift to saving his crew and getting back to England alive, which kind of amazingly they do. So I know we haven't lost our sight on all of these important issues in higher ed, but what pivots have you had to make as a result of COVID, and what lessons have you learned from that this year? And maybe we can start with Mark this time.
Well, I would say, first of all, what we're proud of is the fact that our faculty and staff pivoted almost overnight to remote teaching and work. And then they worked very hard month after month, week after week, to try to continue to get better at that. We're just a little less than a week away from year rounding, when on March 11th, we were the first university to move to remote teaching. We moved to remote work a week before the governor or the mayor told us we had to. We were the ones that gathered the rest of the universities together and made a petition to our federal delegation to help us get some federal aid that had we not had it, we wouldn't be able to still be standing here today. So we appreciate what the federal government and our delegation has done to help us with that. We're proud of our students. Clearly, what technology is teaching is that being adaptable and persevering through all these changes is going to be one of the most important skills for your success in life. For better or for worse, our students have had crash courses in that in the last year. And we wish we'd been able to offer a closer to normal experience, but they adapted very well. And we delivered an on-campus experience to the greatest extent we could. And many universities didn't try. So I'm proud of that. We've also gotten to know our cities a whole lot better. We maybe didn't even know who the public health authorities were in our communities. And now they're on speed dial with us, and we're having regular dialogues and conversations as to how we can both keep our community safe and continue our mission of advancing students on their educational journey so that they can be on that path in life. And throughout all of this, we, with my request to the foundation, we're able to provide some emergency financial aid to our students. We were able to provide extra support for our mental health. So we had a lot of partners in getting to where we are today, but it's been a rough a couple of months, and we have a few more in front of us. But the CU community really stepped up, and I'm appreciative for all our faculty and staff for all they've done to make that happen.
Thank you, President Kennedy. Chancellor Marks, your thoughts on?
Well, first I'll echo what President Kennedy said, and we've been working as a system, the other chancellors of campuses, with President Kennedy and his team, really on a weekly basis, and we're grateful for the support, which has really made a huge difference. So thank you for that. That is absolutely true. Well, I'll start with just what I've learned. As you mentioned, Paul, I started my job in the middle of this pandemic, and just in talking with so many people, I know that people are scared, and I've personally talked with our students and faculty and staff who've lost loved ones, who are anxious and depressed, and this has been hard on everybody. And through this, there's been a lot of shifts and changes and new information that's changing all the time. So I've certainly learned the importance of communication, which looks differently. We're mostly in 2D these days. It's important for people to know what's going on and not to sugarcoat things when we've had to deliver information over the last year. But I also believe that optimism and hope, and that conveying a sense of momentum cannot be underestimated in terms of the importance of moving through this difficult time. So as we're battling this pandemic and its impact on all of our work and our mental health, it's also so important for us to focus on our excitement and the possibilities for the future. And this is a real moment for higher ed and for CU Denver. And that part for me has been very genuine because of the conversations that I've had with students and faculty and staff and alumni that I've met and the true belief I have in where we're heading. I'm so proud of CU Denver from, as President Kennedy mentioned, the quick pivot to remote teaching and learning last March, to the careful planning of the safe return. Paul, that you helped lead for our campus. We prioritize safety, but also flexibility for students. The innovation and creativity that it's brought in our community has been incredible. I know colleges all over America had to do this emergency remote education, and it was a jolt to everybody, maybe except for the universities that had a very large online presence. And it exposed challenges in the technological underpinnings for us. And those are challenges that we need to do something about. And President Kennedy's leading some initiatives, and we are moving in that space, taking big steps. And yet we had to find a way to keep education going. And we did cool things like provide online orientations and campus tours and counseling virtually, wellness sessions virtually. We completely overhauled our student help desk so that by the time fall semester started, our students had a one-stop shop so they could get all their questions about answered. They didn't have to kind of do a shuffle to different offices. These are innovations that we're going to keep and hold on to. And so that's why I think this is a once in a generation moment to harness these innovations and to be more student-centered and to manage through this pandemic with investments in digital technology that CU is making and CU Denver is making to improve the student experience and meet students where they are. So I'm very proud, and I'm excited to be thinking about the next normal.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, I think the CU and all the campuses have really done an amazing job balancing our mission and safety. So thank you. My next question is maybe the broadest one and a challenging one. I think, in our civil discourse in the last couple of years, especially, but maybe longer than that, we've had different views of reality, different views of truth, whether it's around climate change or election outcomes or things of that nature. And frankly, they've been fairly difficult. And at the same time, and at the university, we want to have balanced, conversations about controversial issues, but we also want to seek truth and understand truth and reality as we find it in our research and our teaching. And so I'm wondering how you as leaders are thinking about this difficult and complicated issue at this point in time. And maybe we'll start with Michelle.
Sure. Yes, you are right. It's complicated. Amid the pandemic and the economic impact that the pandemic has had, and the racial injustice that it's revealed, and the insurrection at the U.S. Capitol, and we're seeing how the erosion of truth exposes our vulnerability and our inequities. That is absolutely true. I do think it's created a growing awareness that as a society, we all own the responsibility for finding truth and for disagreeing civilly and for safeguarding and for improving this democracy, which I think we've all seen how fragile it is. And I think that is why universities are so important to the solution. And CU Denver, I think, is one of the relatively few places in America that brings an incredibly diverse group of students together to learn and to listen to alternate perspectives and to teach critical analysis so that we and our students can discern fact from propaganda and discuss what are the requirements for an inclusive democratic society. And together we can deliberate and think to improve about how we improve democracy. And so it's different than so many places in America. And even many other institutions of higher ed that are less diverse. We're places where people who are surrounded by people who share the same background and the same perspective. Our students here and higher ed in general, we reflect the changing demographics in Colorado and in our nation. And I think this is an opportunity we can't let go. We must lead respectful, robust, inclusive discussions that can begin the hard but needed rebuilding of trust and empathy across difference.
Thanks, Chancellor Marks. President Kennedy, and of course, you've had the additional experience of working in Congress, which sometimes deals with these kinds of issues.
Indeed. I think in the most recent years, what is really fueling a lot of this, I believe, is that so few people pay for news. And if you don't pay for your news, you're the product. You're having social media that you're getting free that is customizing what you see to reinforce what you want to believe. and having news being advocated or put in front of you that other people are paying so that you can see that, and trying to have you go along that ever more narrow path. And so much of what we see, there may be some truth in it, but it's such a narrow slice of truth that is completely different than anybody else's narrow slice of truth, that we don't have that sort of common understanding as a society. And so that's where I encourage people to actually pay for your news, and pay for news from different points of view, incredible points of view. So I begin my day every day by reading the Wall Street Journal, which I view as at least the editorial page, the voice of the intelligent right, the New York Times, and the Washington Post, which I view as the voice of the intelligent left, and look and compare and contrast and try to figure out what different angles are there on seeing this. I read The Economist, I read others to get this point of news. And there's two things that are very worrying to me. Number one is that 80 or 90% of people on either party view the other party as being harmful to the nation. What's harmful to the nation is people thinking that the other party is harmful to the nation. Because if you look at our national seal, the only thing on our national seal is E pluribus unum, out of many one. And if you read the Federalist Papers and you go through all of that, they work very hard to force the factions to come together. And when the factions go together, the wheels of our democracy grind to a halt and aren't able to address the big challenges in front of us. So it's very worrisome that our democracy has become so lack of an ability to function. Certainly in a lack of ability to function on a bipartisan basis, where you have one sweep of executive orders get just replaced the day another one starts, and none of that has any meaningful, and there's no long-term path. And we just need to figure out how we understand that the other side is not our enemy. The other side is somebody we can learn from, and together we are much stronger. And so I agree with the Chancellor Marks that universities are the place where we need to bring that critical thinking, where we need to be asking students tough, difficult questions, not telling them, asking them, getting them to think. Have you thought about it from this angle? Getting them to discuss and debate amongst themselves. We have such an opportunity to help solve this issue as a university. And despite sometimes we don't always get credit for doing as well as we can, I think if you go campus by campus, we have a much richer dialogue than most people would expect. And certainly I'm committed to fostering that.
Thank you. Chancellor Marks, in her answer to the last question, also brought in the DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion issues, which, again, over the last couple of years have been raised to a new level in our society, and I think a new level on campuses as well. And so starting with Mark, how do you feel CU is doing in this area, and what can we do to be better in DEI?
Well, I think we've done perhaps more action steps in the last year than we did in a long time before that, but this is a long journey. It's going to take all of us for working hard for a long time for us to get to where we need to go, because if you think about it, if we're not there, we're very close to being a majority minority nation from a high school graduate perspective. And we are not getting enough of them to attract it to our colleges, to get all the way through our college, to give them those degrees. We don't have all the things we can do to make them feel as welcome and included as we would like. And we need to get better at it regularly. So the efforts that are happening on all 4 campuses in terms of not only our DEI professionals, but the action steps. I know that Chancellor Marks has a working group coming and figuring out what more we can do is stuff that we're working. We're doing a lot more training so that we can all have a better understanding. We're doing a lot, real focus on our outreach for a long time. We've had a pre-collegiate program that has gone out and tried to reach people, particularly with less represented community, for more or less represented communities, to get them to think about college, because maybe they never thought it was for them, to help them prepare for it so they can be prepared. We're also doing a lot of action steps. A couple I would point out is that we have the Systems First indigenous land recognition that we have, and we're leading the effort at the legislature to allow us to offer in-state tuition to all of the people with tribes that once upon a time used to call Colorado home. But beyond that, I was pleased that the foundation also responded to my request to have a $5 million diversity, equity, and inclusion innovation fund that we're spreading across the campuses. We have not yet heard the good ideas they're going to come up with and advance that. But ultimately, you measure what's important to you. And in our strategic plan, a quarter of our measures are focused on how can we make sure that we're advancing more, we're getting more diverse amongst our faculty, staff, and students. We're making sure that they're graduating and that we're making everybody feel included. But we have a lot more to do, as hard as we're working at it right now.
Thank you. Michelle?
Well, I agree. We're doing a lot. I've heard about a lot of really important, wonderful things we're doing on our campus. And I know that our that this campus at CU Denver has a passionate commitment to equity and social justice. And I learned a lot about this during my 100-day listening tour. It's one of our most important organizational values. But I also agree that if I had to answer that question, honestly, in my assessment of how we're doing, I would say that we still have a lot of progress to make. And CU Denver is remarkably diverse. About half of our undergraduates are students of color, half are first generation, about half are low income. And we're proud of our diverse student body, and we're the most diverse research university in Colorado. And yet Black and brown students don't graduate at the rates that white students do. We're doubling down on ways to provide more wraparound support to students who need it, to strengthen our relationships with high schools, to find the barriers and knock them down. And yet we need to do more, and we will do more. Also, our faculty and staff don't represent the diversity that we have in the Denver area and of our student body, and we need to do more, and we will. I would say these are issues that most campuses across America face, but that can't be a cover. And I also feel like, as the only urban public research university in Colorado and one of the most diverse institutions in the whole nation, we need to do more. We need to lead in this space. We need to hit the issues head on. We need to have a thoughtful, holistic, systemic way of dealing with it, and we need to act. I've been here 8 months. I arrived in Colorado literally 1 month after George Floyd was killed in police custody. I spent my first 10 days on the job listening to the community, specifically on equity and racial justice. And what I heard informed a bunch of commitments that I've made. We hired our first ever CU Denver specific vice chancellor for diversity, equity, and inclusion, who will join us this month. I appointed the director of ethnic studies program as our first ever faculty fellow to advise me and my leadership team and deans on this work. We worked with Auraria to establish a community advisory board to the Auraria Campus Police Department. But a lot of these challenges require digging much deeper into the core of our challenges. And so we as President Kennedy mentioned, we have an equity task force that I charged in the fall. We've got 115 faculty and staff and students that have been looking at the structural barriers to hiring and promotion of underrepresented faculty and staff and how we can close the achievement gap. I'm going to get their recommendations in a month. It's going to be an ambitious plan to determine where we go from here. And this should lay out some concrete answers to the questions of how we are going to do better. So I also just want to thank President Kennedy and the CU Foundation for providing us with some real funding to invest in the solutions that this task force comes up with. They're hard issues, but our community is ready to tackle them, and I'm ready to lead.
Thank you. You mentioned funding, and that leads to our next question. And obviously the pandemic has been difficult for our budgets for everyone, including higher ed. But even before the pandemic, we were 47th in the nation of the 50 states in state funding for higher ed. And that's been true for quite a while. Our tuition's, probably about normal for in-state institutions around the country. So it would seem to me that you combine those two things, and we have less money than lots of our peer institutions, and yet we do amazing things. But how would you assess our financial situation now, and how can we make it stronger in the future, especially with the concerns about tuition increases and student debt that are all over higher ed? Michelle, do you want to start on that one?
Well, like everywhere in lean economic times, higher ed's often the first to take the cut. And it's competing against K-12 and roads and healthcare and transportation. And that's been frustrating. And we've seen quite a flip all around the country. And I got Colorado is no different, maybe worse. But we work to change it by advocating in the legislature. CU has an incredibly powerful advocacy group. And frankly, we have a lot to say about the value of higher ed to the state's economy and to society, which I think is a compelling and convincing story. I know I've been talking with the employers since I've been here, and they want great talent and they want more diversity in that talent. And that's what we do at CU Denver. We provide a very diverse group of students with a great education, and we are working more and more to link that education with the needs of employers and with the post-COVID economy. So I also, many of CU Denver's graduates stay in Colorado, and many other colleges can't say that. So I know our legislators are also focused on economic disparities in Colorado. And actually, earlier this week, I don't know if any of you saw it, but I had the pleasure of watching Denver Chamber CEO and CU Denver alum Kelly Brow interview Raj Chetty, who's the superstar Harvard economist, on the wealth gap in America and also in Colorado. And he mentioned as a nation that white median wealth is 8 times greater than Black families and 5 times greater than Latino families. And far fewer kids are growing up able to reach the American dream. He showed cool, very disturbing data, actually, that showed since the 1940s to where it is now, it's so much harder to get ahead. And his studies and others show that one critical factor in getting ahead is getting to and through college. And investing in universities that support low-income and diverse student bodies and those that are helping to find ways to graduate these students and move them into the workforce. It's one of the best economic and societal investments that states can make. So I think we've got a strong argument. We need to continue to make it. And at the same time, we need to keep tuition as low as we can. We don't want our students, half of whom are low income, to graduate facing mountains of student debt. We're working on more ways to be efficient about the way that we spend, but we also need powerful advocacy of what it takes to give students access and help them succeed in college.
Thank you. President Kennedy?
Well, you are right that we are very efficient. I did an analysis where we looked at what do we get from state funding? What do we get from in-state tuition? We divide that by the number of in-state students we graduate, we teach, and then we compare that to every other flagship university system. And we deliver more to the state of Colorado for what we receive than any other university in the country, not even counting the fact that we deliver $1.25 billion of research. And our research enterprise is one of the biggest enterprises in the state of Colorado, and we're helping to fund that by having our faculty time that we're paying for to deliver that. We're delivering entrepreneurship. But I would just say that, we talked about student debt a couple times. Let's not forget that half the people that graduate from the University of Colorado have no debt, and the other half have about $25,000 in debt, which you'd pay for a mid-price Chevy, and your Chevy would depreciate over time, and your college degree appreciates over time, and you get $1 million, $1.5 million, $2 million lifetime benefit for that. So there's a huge benefit to getting through that college, and we are delivering a great value. And the debt issue is not a CU graduate issue. It might be some other graduate issue. It's not us. It may be partly that they didn't get through CU, which is our lack of funding. When you look at where we're short, we're more short on the staff side than we are on the faculty side. And a lot of time, I can say as a first generation college graduate, I could have used a little bit more staff time going through there to give me some advice on some of the things that I didn't know. So that hurts me. But when Chancellor Marks talked about the wealth gap, when you look at how you really solve DEI, you get more of them a college graduate. But if there's these burdens that they have to figure out how to navigate everything and how to pay for it, we're treating higher ed as a private good. My kids and grandkids are probably going to have the opportunity to, but others may not. And there is a private benefit to it. But if we don't treat it as a public good, people talk about systemic barriers to progress on solving our diversity, equity, and inclusion issues. This is the number one systemic barrier, is people's unwillingness to treat higher education as a public good, because the individuals need it. We need it for our talent that our commerce needs to continue to succeed. So we need to do a better job. How do we solve it? First of all, you have to keep all of the universities together. I am pleased and proud that we all stayed together last year, and that we all but one stayed together this year. I'm disappointed that one decided that they had to go off, because we're never going to solve this unless we're together. But we're not going to solve it even together as higher ed. We need to have the business community behind it. The business leaders that Chancellor Marks talks about talking to, they need to be speaking out and saying, yes, we need more talent. We're willing to invest that. That's why I joined the Colorado Business Roundtable board of directors, and that's why I joined Colorado Concern, was to better connect with those business communities so that we can help them understand that they need to come alongside us to make a case for treating higher ed as a public good and investing more so that they can have the talent that we'll all need to prosper in the future.
Good. Very well said. Thank you. The next question I'll just put out to President Kennedy, since he deals more directly with the regents. And as you look around other states, very few other states have the elected regents that we have, with R's and D's next to their name, and congressional districts and 6-year terms. They typically have different boards. And I know several of the regents, they're great people. They work hard, they're volunteers. But nevertheless, there's this perception that, you know, they sometimes are bringing in outside political agendas to the university in their role and work as regents. And so I'm wondering, Mark, how you have found the best ways of working in this complicated political governance system.
Well, let me just say, first of all, that the regents do spend a lot of time. When you think of the number of hours that they spend in an average week for volunteer role, it is a sacrifice and a service. And there is no doubt that at times we would receive pressures one way or another that come partisan. Now, I think issues that we face are not really partisan issues. There's very few of them, if any, that are focused on what we need to do to make CU deliver the best education, discovery, and service we can. And so part of what I've been working hard at doing is bringing them into the tough decisions that we're facing, bringing some of the things we're looking at in our strategic plan so that they can wrestle with it with us and to gain their input early. And so, for example, online and what we're doing for investing in technology, I think particularly with the technology going on in the future, it's essential that CU make further progress than we've made in recent past on this. And they were willing to spend an hour each with me on going through all of that and talking through what we're doing and why we're doing it and getting their input. So I think having the university more effectively putting forth, here's the real issues we're wrestling with, gaining their input is what I have found. I think if you look, the board has been acting in a very responsible way to advance the university's interest through much of the time that I've been here. And if you look at our last region meeting was, I think, one of our best. So I know they're all dedicated, and there's also an increased reaching out across party lines amongst the regents in recent months that I think is also very healthy. So just one example of that, if you look at Regent Sharkey and Regent Spiegel had an op-ed that they asked us to place in Aurora and Pueblo advocating for test optional. I think when you both have a Republican and a Democrat region speaking in harmony in the public on an issue that's of interest to the university, they can be very powerful and effective. And I think actions like that are helping them to see that. We also had, when we were advocating for our bill on the indigenous tuition in in-state levels, we also had regents weighing in from both sides on that. So we're inviting them to come in and engage in the constructive way, bipartisan as much as possible, specifically on the issues of interest to helping us be better at teaching, discovering, and serving.
Great. Thank you so much. We're doing well on time. I have one more question for the Chancellor and the President about strategic planning. I see there's about 7 questions in the Q&A from the audience, and so we'll get to those after this last question. And if you have other questions in the audience, please put them out there now or be thinking about them. And so my last question is about strategic planning, and I'll start with Michelle. I know we're running a big process on campus. It's very important, and I think our target year we're looking at to is 2030. And I know the CU system has also been engaged in strategic planning, although maybe a little bit put to the side by COVID, but certainly coming back to that. So where are we with strategic planning, and what do you think will come out of it, and what excites you about the future for us?
Well, there's a lot that excites me about the future, and thanks for asking about our 2030 planning at CU Denver. We launched the process in January because we know that CU Denver needs to position itself for a world where higher ed is changing, like we've talked about. And I think the old model of college is the model of life going like you learn and then you earn and then you rest, right? And so in that model, the learning part of college goes right in after high school and before a career. But futurists are talking about the norm for the lifespan of babies that are born today is living to 100 years old. And I hope that's the case. And although we've done a little backsliding with COVID for sure, but hopefully that won't last long. And also that young people today will have an average of 12 job changes across their lifetime. And so people are working longer and working looks different, and the shelf life of knowledge is shorter. So we, as we think about what university should be, especially a university positioned in the middle of an urban core, we know it has to be a partner to both students and to employers over the course of a lifetime. And we also know that recovering from the societal and the economic impacts of this pandemic is going to require big ideas and innovative solutions and an adaptable workforce. And so we're thinking strategically at CU Denver about what differentiates us from the rest of the pack within the CU family and beyond. And we've already generated a draft statement of our purpose and our vision that's out for community feedback. We're to redesign higher education to work for everyone, to transform lives, to uplift communities, to expand economies. And we've listed out our values and the characteristics that we believe are important for CU Denver graduates. And we are the most diverse public research university in Colorado, and our student body reflects that. And our urban location provides a built-in relevance and a big entrepreneurial opportunity for our students and our community. People want to live in Denver. People want to work here. People want to go to school here. This is an amazing set of strengths that CU Denver has, and we need to bring those together and put it forward in a strategy for our future. So our plan is going to do this. We're going to think about how we retain high quality, retain affordability, continue and even grow flexibility. Half our students are from transfer students. We want to be best in class in transfer. We want to think about the concept of hybridity with online, on ground, and everything in between. Stackability of credentials, like President Kennedy mentioned earlier. And we want to embody this in a succinct, exciting set of ideas of a future vision and strategy that propels this institution forward. We want to pride ourselves on our inclusivity, not our exclusivity, which is different and I think much needed in higher ed. So very excited about it. Should be finished in June. Can't wait to share it.
Awesome. Thank you, Chancellor Marks. President Kennedy, the CU's system plan.
Let me just say that, the system plan does not replace the campus plan that you just heard Chancellor Marks talk about. They all sort of feather in. What we talk about is what are the few things that we're going to focus on making sure that the campuses are delivering. And so my idea of a strategic plan is something that's strategic that has fewer than a dozen metrics that we're saying, here's what we're looking at. They're in 4 pillars, we call them: affordability and student access, discovery and impact, our diversity, inclusion, equity, and access, as well as our fiscal strength. And within the affordability, we believe that the best way to have affordability is have more people get the degree. Because as I said, if you get that degree, you're going to get an uplift. It's people that don't get all the way there. So we're going to really be focusing on those graduation and retention rates with a special eye on less represented populations and our veterans. But within that pillar, we're also focused on campus wellness and mental health. So one of the things we're looking for is having each of the campuses every year be doing a survey on their wellness culture for faculty, staff, and students, and tracking where that pinpoints they need to make progress on, making sure that everybody is more broadly aware of mental health issues and services that we have availability so they can help those that are with those and reduce the stigma. But the innovation in teaching and learning has got to be a part of that, because for us to make it more affordable, we need to be having those stackable credentials. We need to be embracing adaptive learnings. And what you'll see us, besides having metrics, is we believe in bottoms up. We believe it comes from the campuses up. That's why we created a DEI innovation fund, that we had a slice for the campuses, say, you come up with your ideas. Similarly, we may have some sort of incentive fund that helps the early adapters adapt new ideas of teaching and learning. Within discovery and impact, clearly how much research we do is important, and how much healthcare we deliver is important, which we'll be managing. Within the DEI space, we're looking at tracking the diversity of our faculty, staff, and students, trying to get that more where it should be to really serve our state, but also doing a survey every year that would track, are you feeling included? So that each campus can pinpoint, here's the populations that we have the most challenge with making them feel included, so that we ask them to come up with an action plan to address those specific challenges. And the last area is fiscal strength. That's technology helps us do more for less. We need better technology, and that's why we're making a big investment in that. But also, if you're not nervous about the federal debt, you should be, particularly when we get $1 billion plus in research fund from that. And if that dried up, we'd be in a world of hurt. So having a greater collaboration with our corporate partners and other partners is important. And I also believe we're in a battle between clicks and bricks, between those that are getting their education, by clicking on the computer versus coming to bricks. Some of our bricks are pretty tired. Maybe not as much on a younger campus like Denver, but certainly up at Boulder and other campuses. So dealing with deferred maintenance, we need to have shiny bricks to compete with the shiny clicks for us to be long-term successful. Those are amongst the things we're wrestling with at the system level.
Thank you so much. Those are both exciting visions for the system and the campus, and looking forward to seeing how we can work through that and how it plays out into a very fascinating future. So there's about 10 questions. A couple of them are similar. I'll combine a few of them maybe, but move fast. And and thank you, by the way, both of you, for very concise answers to fairly lengthy and sometimes complicated questions, and keeping on time in terms of track. So there's one question about, sort of more specifically with COVID, that with everybody pivoting to online, what we take away from that. Will we be more online? Will we be more synchronous? Zoom kinds of classes that we've had. Is this going to, or will there be an appetite to go back face to face for what people have missed? Or how are we thinking about that at the system and campus levels?
I'm happy to start with, I'll speak from, I'll say it broadly, that I think there's so many different needs of students all over the country that we need many models to provide education for the range of higher ed students across the country. For CU Denver, I'm thinking about this notion of hybridity, and not just hybridity going forward when it comes down to the way that curriculum is delivered, again, on that spectrum of fully on ground in the traditional way to fully online and everything in between. But thinking about our campus as an urban campus needing to serve learners over the, flexibly and over the course of their lifetime. Hybridity as it connects to student services and the way they're delivered. Some of our biggest innovations during COVID have been when we were forced to put all of our services online. And you know what? Many of them have really worked well for students. Hybridity when it comes to things like career services. The old model of career services is, you show up in an office and work on your resume or have employers in, but we need to be much more technology centered and much more meeting students where they are and helping our students who are out in the communities navigate the complex job landscape of today and bring in real job market data and sector information. So in short, I believe that for an urban institution like CU Denver, we are going to try to meet the learner where they are, and that means offering learning in different forms. Telework, by the way, is another, everybody went to telework. And while I know people like me are dying to have more people around us, I miss the social interaction. It is true that we're getting smarter about how we can use flexible work. So hybridity as a whole, I think, is a good model of how CU Denver will be going forward.
Thank you. Mark, do you want to weigh in on that one?
Well, you asked whether we're going to be having more online. Yes, not only, if you look at pre-pandemic, the on-campus only students have been shrinking for a decade. And within the on-campus only students, an increasing portion of those pre-pandemic were taking some of their courses online because they're in band, choir, they're working. They can, okay, I can take these 2 or 3, I can fit to a schedule, otherwise I need some flexibility in my life. So, I mean, I haven't found the exact source, but I've heard it quoted, and I believe it's probably true that there's more students that have kids than there are students that are living in a dorm. And more and more, the hybridity that you heard Chancellor Marks talk about, you're going to see that online and on campus is going to become blurred. Within a course, perhaps some of the course components are online and some of them are on campus. You need to be in campus having that dialogue and discussion and debate. Of course, you need to be better off being in campus, but a lot of it could probably be best delivered through an adaptive learning tool. Within a degree, there can be pieces of that are online or on campus. And those universities that can adapt that level of flexibility, that is having it be student-centric. What does the student want? Give them options, are going to be the ones that are going to succeed. So I think that's got to be our goal. And with what we're pushing for in online, like in these innovation funds, it's bottoms up delivered through. We want to have the tools and the fit and finish and the marketing that can make it successful against the Arizona states and the Western governors and the Southern New Hampshires of the world. We want to be able to empower campus innovation to achieve that. But the more you think hybridity, the more you think staff, the more you think not just degrees, but non-degree credentials, the more we're going to meet the needs of our students and state and nation, and the more successful CU will be.
Thank you. There's a question on online about tenure lines and the future of tenure. I being a Woody Allen fan, I always thought, when I got tenure, that it would go away across all of higher ed and it wouldn't be worth anything anymore. But it's a fairly unique model, and it emphasizes, of course, the research side of the enterprise. But certainly, CU and the campuses, like many around the country, have been adding a lot of IRC faculty, clinical faculty, lecturers. And what do you see as the future of the mix of tenure lines and other kinds of teaching positions at our universities? Mark, do you want to start?
Yes. Actually, when I was at North Dakota, there was a push to reduce the protections of tenure, and my provost and I specifically came out against that. I think if tenure changes, it'll change from the Ivy down, not somebody up. So I'll let the Ivies think about whether they want to change their tenure. But between now and then, I think there are a lot of benefits from having, as you say, people with a dedicated mission to research and to advance the knowledge and to have those. But if you look at the mix of tenure and non-tenure faculty within CU, we're probably as significant of a slice of tenure relative to most of our peers. And so there is a place for both. And certainly with the variability and the adaptability that higher ed needs to be able to do, I think it makes sense to have a mixture of both, but both have their purpose in us delivering on our mission. And just as we ought to think about, is it better off being on campus or online? We ought to be thinking, as we're delivering on that teaching mission, how can we mix and match our tenure faculty and our non-tenure faculty in the best way in order to deliver the best outcome for our students.
Thank you. Michelle?
I support what Mark says, and we value all of our faculty, and it's important to make them, to provide them in an environment where they can, that enables them to teach and research on areas that they deem important.
There's an interesting question online about as universities get more involved with maybe broader aspects of their students' lives, mental health, and especially their situation at home vis-a-vis the pandemic. How much further should or could higher ed be going in dealing with social issues that are out there that are certainly influencing our students, but maybe not directly under our influence, but something that we might advocate for more political setting or outreach? And do you see that trend continuing of higher ed, having a bigger footprint perhaps in some of our students' lives?
Well, this year there's been a trend across America, and certainly in mental health issues and in college, and students coming to college with more mental health issues than before. Some of that, there are probably many reasons for that, but it is something that colleges across America have been dealing with, is how do we find more resources to support our students' mental health while in college. And certainly during the pandemic, this has been exacerbated. And we have tried with some of the funds, thanks to the foundation, the system, and elsewhere, we have tried to help students manage their rent costs, and they're paying their utility bills, and supporting the financial needs when they lost their restaurant jobs that they had pre-pandemic. So I think it's absolutely, for CU Denver students, it's absolutely essential that we think about students holistically, and we try to provide the wraparound support to keep them in college and keep them succeeding.
And I think it's a bit like what I talked about, with public versus private education, private value of education. There's a number of services that some people don't think we ought to be offering, perhaps because they don't think they need it or their kids need it. But there are more and more significant share of society that needs that extra help. And I think if you look across our campuses, we're never going to meet the need for mental health because it's not being funded in the way it should be. So there's always going to be a shortage. But across our campuses, we have some of the best mental health support and health and wellness support of any campus in the region. And I think it's going to become a competitive advantage for us. And I'm hopeful. I also wanted to address one question which gets at me a bit about cost of education going higher than rate of inflation. That may have been true a couple Super Bowls ago for the Broncos, but we since 2014 for all income categories, the cost, out-of-pocket cost for an education for University of Colorado across their campuses is 8% less today in real terms than it was in 2014. Yes, it galloped up prior to that because basically state governments abandoned their support for higher education, and we needed to keep our enterprises afloat. But for nearly a decade now, we have been going down in cost less than the rate of inflation. Our costs have been less than the rate of inflation for nearly a decade, and yet that decade-old myth still lingers. And so I think it's important that I answer that question.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's very insightful. I want to respect everyone's time, our 100 or so audience members and our terrific panelists. I do also just want to give Mark and Michelle a last lightning round chance to mention any other issues in higher ed that we didn't get to today, and then we'll say goodbye and go on to the rest of our Friday afternoons. So Michelle, do you have anything else to add?
Oh, just that I see for CU Denver, even though it's been an exhausting, difficult year, I feel an incredible sense of hope and optimism for the opportunities that exist, in part because this CU Denver community isn't old enough to be stuck in their ways. And I think there's a willingness and a very strong student care and student centeredness. But I think also being in the middle of a city that's as exciting as Denver is, in a state that's as impressive as Colorado is, there's a big opportunity for CU Denver. And I think I just ask everybody to keep watching us as we move forward.
And I will just say, when you're in a leadership position, you do some things that are great and good, and some things that you wish you could do differently. Amongst the things I'll put forth as the things that I've done right is hiring Chancellor Marks, and I think she's doing a phenomenal job for your campus. I think our campus has got bright days ahead, the University of Colorado Denver campus, and she's doing all this when she's only been here during the pandemic. I just can't wait to see the wonderful things she'll do once we get beyond this pandemic. So it's great to be on the panel with you.
Well, thank you again so much. I know how valuable your time is, how busy you are, and just greatly appreciate these thoughts on CU and higher ed. And thanks again, and everyone have a great and safe weekend.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you so much. Bye.